Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of How to Buy a Football Club, where we'll cover calculating club valuations. How to Buy a Football Club is an FCG webinar made for members by members. Today's agenda, we are looking at, again, how to calculate football club valuation, and then we will go into a Q&A session after that as well for anyone here at the live session. So, why is it so hard to calculate football club valuation? Well, picture this. You're hunting for your dream house, you find a gem, but wait, hold on a second. Different websites and different people are giving you wildly different prices. Maybe a few $1 million off or $100 million off, even sometimes from each other. Sounds confusing, right? So now imagine you are trying to buy a football club. Well, it's just as perplexing because there are varying prices and opinions that can be drastically different from each other depending on who you're asking. For example, Liverpool, in a recent valuation from 2021, was valued three different numbers by KPMG, Forbes, and academic experts. So the KPMG valuation. Now, they're financial wizards with their own proprietary algorithm, they call it, where in 2021, they valued Liverpool at $2.7 billion. Now, their method is kind of like a high-tech crystal ball that considers financial performance, market potential, and brand strength. But let's keep digging and see what others also, valued it. If we look at Forbes, they valued it at 2.9 billion pounds. Now, that's quite a leap from KPMG's figure. Forbes uses annual revenue and other more financial metrics to come up with their valuation. And it just goes to show that, we're looking at a difference here between almost $1 billion in valuation between two major sources. So now we go to the scholarly perspective. Kieran Maguire is an academic from the University of Liverpool who's written many books and done much on football club costs and the price of football, as you can see. Now, he valued Liverpool at only $1.5 billion. And so his bespoke method that factors revenue, net assets, and some other metrics actually say that Liverpool was worth way less than the other two. And now who do we use, right? Who, when you say, who will, well, not we for buying Liverpool, but who does the investment firm or individual billionaire right now use to do that? And how do you get the buyer and the seller to agree, right? And that's something that we will continue to explore. But we wanted to start with this just to let you know that this webinar wasn't going to be like, hey, here's a direct formula of how everyone in the world values football clubs. It is something that is quite complex and has varying opinions. So let's dive in and learn a little bit more about that. Here's a case study. Let's compare West Ham and Southampton, for example. Now, despite their similar histories, their valuations are pretty far apart. West Ham is valued at around 650 million pounds, where Southampton is valued at 230 million pounds. Now, why would you say? Their net debt, their stadium deals, their market potential all play a big role. And in this case, this financial derby, as they say, these debt considerations are what really changed the score between those two places. So we look at enterprise value here to understand why a club's value might be lower, even if they're bringing in a certain amount of money or they have certain assets on the table. So when you buy a club, you also buy their debt. So you have to think of it as buying the whole package, the warts and all, they say. For example, understanding enterprise value, it helps us see the full financial picture. If you were to just look at how much revenue, Southampton and West Ham are generating and how much their stadium is worth, you'd clearly, as we go back to that other slide, might think they're similar. But Southampton's debts make their overall valuation much lower than West Ham's. Let's continue on. Revenue multiples is another common valuation tool. So another firm you may have heard of, Deloitte, for instance, uses a multiple of 1.5 or 2 times revenue for mid-tier premier clubs. But why? Well, it's a quick gauge and a quick way to gauge the value based on income. But sometimes if you're not applying this properly, and if you're not a professional like Deloitte, which may sometimes also be questionable, it could be like comparing apples and oranges, right? And so you have to be very careful about using revenue multiples and make sure you're using similar ones when calculating things differently. So that takes us to another way of different valuation approaches. There's 2 main approaches. There's the relative valuation, and then there's the economic valuation. So relative valuation compares clubs based on revenue multiples, as we were just talking about. Economic valuation works backwards, asking, what does this club need to achieve, let's say, financially, to justify the price? It's kind of like valuing a rare painting in all cases, right? It's always a little bit subjective and it's always a little bit fascinating. So continuing to talk about the challenges, right? And highlighting this, valuing football clubs is not just about numbers. Clubs have inconsistent revenues as well. So even if we were going to talk about just numbers, they're not run really like typical businesses, and you can't project revenue for too far into the future because certain things that are not always in your control actually have way more of a factor that may happen in the next 6 to 10 months. You might win, you might lose. You can only understand, as Man City showed, that you may win some things, but you can only pay so much to really you can't really guarantee victory every single time in every single tournament. So, clubs are also community treasures. So aside from the fact that the numbers are unpredictable, there's this emotional and intrinsic value that certain clubs have for certain people. And certain clubs have that for even more people. So these unique factors make the club valuation process as complex as a messy dribble. And, you don't want to be hit right in the head with the boot. So you want to really try to understand that what really goes into club valuations is not something that maybe any of us might really even try to tackle as something we need to do. And as we'll get along further, and we'll talk about later on, we're really going to be relying on experts and finding the right partner to help us do this. So if you're watching this webinar, just know no one is asking you or I to become experts in football club valuation. What we need to do is find out who we want to partner with and which method we believe might be the best at getting us to that result. So let's talk about another model, because why not? There's more. Enter the Markham multivariate model, a football-specific valuation method. Now, this is a complex playbook here, and this was created by Dr. Tom Markham, and this model provides a detailed valuation framework. You can see the example formula there. It actually is pretty well-renowned as a model. It does use different things that factor into football, and it's very, very football specific. And so I think that's what makes this model appealing to others as well. Something we want to also recognize is that geography really matters, and valuation multiples vary by league. So in Germany's, clubs will often trade for more than 2 times the revenue due to strong governance in the German leagues. It is quite predictable what be based on the strong rules structure and governance in German football. In France, it's well below 1.5 as a multiple due to governance issues and the strength of the league. Now, in Spain, top clubs like Real Madrid and Barcelona, they'll get multiples of about 3 or 4 times just due to their global brand power. While the other clubs in Spain will really look more like clubs in Italy, where we'll see slightly higher than France, but slightly lower than England at 1.5 to 2.5 multiples. Again, still a range of multiples within these leagues individually. So, a strong local following, financial certainty or uncertainty, global following, all of these different things, for the league and the club within the league, all have a factor. So where that club is and what league it plays in, and will affect the multiple in regards to revenue projections and valuation. Going back to these elite clubs, right? They're often valued in the billions of dollars with those higher multiples of 3 or 4. And that's because there's a reduced relegation risk, right? If you've been consistently in the top 4 for the last decade, odds of you going to the lower division are lower. And so you can somewhat predict your revenue much better than someone who's maybe coming in 10th in the league or consistently just barely not getting relegated. It's harder to say that in 4 years, that club is still going to be making, let's say, Premier League money or Serie A money. And so this is actually a great time to look at an example of why the Super League even became in existence in the first place, right? These owners of these elite clubs are really focused on valuation, probably more than owners of member-owned clubs, because to them, oftentimes that number is what they're in the game for. And so for them, creating this Super League where they're guaranteed a spot, remember, the idea was that certain clubs would not be able to be relegated out of the tournament, would be a way for them to guarantee revenue growth and project for years to come doing that. And so that's a way that we saw billionaires try to use their own powers and manipulate the system to guarantee valuation and growth for their clubs while suppressing it for other clubs. And another great example too of how the fans came together to stop that. So let's hope we continue to fight as fans together against things like the Super League, and continue to fight for member-owned clubs and football being for all clubs, not just these elite clubs at the top. Speaking of, what are we going to do at FCG, right? How are we approaching valuation? So in the beginning, we talked about how we're going to rely on experts. Now, we've already been in contact with different experts in both due diligence and valuation, to figure out if we want to work with a smaller firm who's actually reached out to us, or we may go to the Deloittes or the KPMGs of the world too, to work with them. Now, what we do know is we're going to rely on these seasoned experts. We're also going to employ a combination of methods, working with financial analysts as well and different industry consultants. So we want to have a multifaceted approach to ensure that we're considering all the financial and non-financial factors, providing a robust foundation for our investment decisions. Together, we will unlock the true value of the club that we aim to acquire. Some final notes. So, to wrap up, valuing a football club involves combining multiple methods for accuracy. Consider both financial and non financial factors. Clubs are more than just businesses, they are cultural icons and institutions with a dynamic market value. And so it's going to ever evolve, and we're going to always evolve with it, just like FCG itself. So I want to thank you for joining this episode of How to Buy a Football Club. Let's keep the conversation going. And in our next episode, we're going to dive into another crucial process that I mentioned briefly a bit earlier, which is due diligence. This phase is all about verifying and validating the valuation that we've either calculated ourselves or been given. And so we want to ensure thoroughness. So we're going to partner again with KPMG or some firms like that to offer a tailored, personalized approach for our needs and make sure that all of the different areas that we need to cover and look at, whether it's financial health, legal standing, operational efficiency. These are all things we're going to start to cover in the next episode. Due diligence is critical. If you haven't heard that phrase before, it's something you should do in all forms of business. But in buying a football club, a world where it is already so complex, and you can't just say, hey, we're selling desks and we've sold 1,000 desks last week, we plan to sell 5,000 desks next week. It's not as simple as that. Due diligence is even more important than if you were buying a desk company, of course, for example. And so I'm looking forward to getting into that episode with you guys. Stay tuned. And now let's get to the Q&A for the live round. I will now stop the recording. Thank you for watching.